I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that a lot of people might have known me, but actually very few people know me. Um, One of the biggest things that you can identify about me is that I had a name change. So if you knew me prior to, I'd say about the age of 14, then you knew me as Lawan Curtis Clark Jr. I was named after somebody else at the time who I thought was my dad. Um, Family might have thought or might have known differently, but at least I was raised for the first 10 years of my life named after someone, believing that my dad was someone else, which kind of trickled into adolescence and the beginning years of my life. I wasn't loved properly growing up, at least from a male's perspective. My dad at that time, didn't really love me the best. He didn't really show much compassion. He didn't really talk much. He didn't play the game with me. We didn't really go outside and do things. We didn't have any activities or father-son bonding moments. Not growing up, at least. I mean, there was times we played the game, but if anything, he would embarrass me and then laugh at me or tease me, stuff like that. But it didn't change until I got older, about 12 to 14. He kind of started to open up about his feelings and his thoughts and where he was as a man. And one of the biggest things we talked about was how he grew up with me, not thinking he was my dad. More say of knowing he wasn't my dad. That was a big trouble he had. It was hard raising a kid that's not yours, especially when you kind of know that's not your kid, but you kind of don't want to say it, or you still want to show up in the best manner as a dad. That's pretty much what his story was. He was still doing his best to show up as a dad, I guess. And as a result, it kind of just changed things for him and for me because it made me grow up without a dad. So I carried his name most of my childhood, actually. I wasn't the most talented kid. I might love basketball now, but back at that time, I was more of a nerd. I was kept to myself. I loved learning things. So I traveled a lot, I would say, like growing up. I was always somewhere. Texas, Georgia, road trips, you name it. I kind of ventured around the world a lot. I wouldn't say the world, but at least 25 of the 50 states. I got to see a lot of different things. So flying or driving or traveling just wasn't nothing new to me. I was able to experience a lot of life as an adolescent. And although I had troubles, in school with, bullies or issues at home with, being abused in many different forms, I still was able to keep my grades the best and keep a smile on my face. That was one thing about me. I never would really frown too much. I would always smile or find joy in the darker times. And that's pretty much what I would say, tales of my adolescence is basically smiling through the pain and learning how to still be who I am, or at least figure out who I am, because at that time, I didn't really know. Growing up with one dad and then finding out at age 14 I had another dad. But then to get all the stories from the first dad about why he acted the way he did and why he was so mean and so rude or so quiet, to then kind of getting a whole new way of life from my real dad. He was a military man and he didn't really tolerate any BS. So that way of living kind of changed because I grew up 14 years without that kind of discipline, so 14, 13, that trickled into my teenage years. And at that time, they changed my name. So if you knew me at, my adolescent ages, I was Lawan Curtis Clark II. But once my name got changed at 14, I just became Juan Jamil May Stokes. So that was a whole identity shift in just being a complete different person now, where I have to say here to just Juan and not Lowan. So that was a big change, I would say, within me. Not much on the outside because I didn't let it phase me or show that it phased me. Because then at the end of the day, it's just a name change. But I felt a lot of ways when it dealt with the traumas or the actions itself. I didn't like not knowing who my real dad was. I didn't like my dad at the time growing up either. I had a vision for what a dad was or an idea, and neither one of them actually lived up to that. Even still to this day, I would say. But I'm 25, so I don't really look for a dad anymore. I kind of look for a mentor or some guidance, which they both do as fathers or as men today. So I appreciate them for that. But as being a dad or teaching a son, they kind of left me hanging as a kid. And that kind of changed my outlook on a lot of things. I would say it started me slow. It made me resentful towards guys. I don't have a lot of guy friends. Not saying I got a lot of girlfriends, but I just don't have a lot of guy friends. I don't really seek out male guidance too much. As far as men, I'm very skeptical because of how I was raised. So that kind of really changed a lot within me. It started the different versions of me that I can look back and reflect on now. So, you got LaJuan, that's one version of me. But then you got Juan, and that started a whole new version of me where, many different pieces of or parts of me died or started to live in the midst. After I got my name changed, I was already dealing with a lot of unnecessary things. Growing up in an abused home, being raised by my mom. She was trying to teach me to be a man, but a lot of that came with physical abuse. And when I met my real dad, that turned more of verbal abuse, and more mental. It was really a lot of derogatory things that was said and a lot of stuff that didn't really inspire me. It kept me in a space where at times I felt stagnant, to a point where I felt depressed, after turning 14, 15, two dads, still going through the physical abuse, and then can't really live with my new dad and meeting my brothers, and then my sister goes off to college. It was just quite a few different things that impacted me at that time that really had me depressed. I was in a dark depression. I hated myself. I didn't know who I was. I couldn't really trust either dad, for that matter. I didn't trust my mom either. All the stories coming out about her knowing who my real dad was and still lying or still putting on this front like she didn't know. That kind of, affected me big time because it created a lot of confusion. So now as I'm older, I don't like confusion. I think that's the fastest way to upset me, is if you confuse me. I don't like being lied to. I'm more of a straightforward and honest person, and for that matter, I don't really dwell in all that excess because of how I was raised. I kind of drew away from people, and although I talk a lot or I might, have friends or be close to people, I'm still very closed off, even with my family, as close as I may be to either one of them, my mom's side or my dad's side. I still have that distance and that safe space I gave to myself because of the mistrust and misuse of growing up. And people can say what they want to say, but we all view our lives differently, and we all take our journeys differently. So my perspective may not be someone else's, but I know what I went through. And the ways that I was raised wasn't the best, My mom had to teach me how to be a man, and she didn't know how to be a man. She's a woman. So that came with a lot of physical damage, times where she would be a lot more aggressive with me than nurturing. And that, as a result, affected a lot of my relationships growing up. So in my adulthood, I started to care less. I didn't care what kind of woman was around. I just didn't tolerate certain things. I didn't care what kind of lifestyles people lived. It was just certain things I wouldn't tolerate, because at that point I didn't give a fuck no more. I wasn't going to be mistreated. I wasn't going to be passed along. I wasn't going to be pushed aside by nobody. And that started a whole new depth of learning within myself, where I'm no longer what someone else calls me, but I am who I am. And that took some time. Like I said, I grew up a different way with different dads and a single mom. And that's not like I grew up in a way that nobody else did, but I grew up in a way that's my own way, and it raised me to be this kind of man. So that depression really lingered, and I was in therapy for quite a while. And so, when I got taken out of therapy, taken off my basketball team, moved across the state, all of these things are just transpiring year after year. Find out that ain't my dad one year, and then the next year they get a divorce. Then the next year I find my new dad. Next year I moved out. I moved back with my old dad. So it's a bunch of back and forth and confusion and frustration and unknown things. And that kind of really changed it for me. It was too many unknowns. And so as I became an adult, once I turned 19, I started to make sure I knew what I was doing. I knew I wanted to go to school for architecture, and I knew I wanted to play basketball. So those were the main two things I kept my focus on. And I found an outlet in the meantime. I found writing, where I started to write about love, the love I keep or the love I share with someone else. I started to write about it. I started to write poems. I started to write detailed notes where I'm just expressing myself. And as an adult, it started to help me figure out who I am. I'm not what they call me, or I'm not LaJuan or just Juan. I'm not what anybody else say. I'm a lot of things. And one of them is a philosopher. Another one is an architect. And another one is a basketball player. And those three things make up the entirety that is me. I am Jamil May, and I would rather take the new middle name and the two-part last name and separate it into the two names that come from my mom and dad. Jamil is the name my dad gave me when he did change my name. That's my middle name, but I'd rather that be the start. And May is my mom's last name, and that's the family name that I would love to keep pushing on, because in the May family, we don't have many males. So on my mom's side, I'm the king. I'm the leader of my mom's side of the family, because we have a lot of women without the male guidance. And that's where I come in to support my family and show them what that exactly looks like. So I had to become the best version of myself. And I'm still working on being a better version of myself. But when you take where I started at, LaJuan Curtis Clark II as my start, to then turn into Jamil May as to where I am now, I didn't tolerate all of that confusion. I didn't let that negativity to infest my spirit. I knew at the end of the day, I was dealing with a lot of things that were out of my control. And although I didn't believe in God at the time, I found faith. I found who I am. And this is just exactly where I am. I had to take a trip, metaphorically, to find God and find peace. So I did that. And now here I am at, 25, doing everything I can to, one, remain out of that dark depression, because it can easily come back when you start to ask questions or have answers that don't have a question, or you have a question that don't have answers. You can really psych yourself out of progress and really result back to neglect, the depression that you might have fought your way out of. And that's just not for me. What's for me is actually moving forward in the identity of Jamil May. Since I became an adult, I started to do everything in my power to be the best version of myself. And I've continued that. I've put forth the best effort in working out. I've put forth the best effort in school, in my writing, and I'm going to continue to do that pushing forward. But in the end, it didn't change where I came from. It didn't change how I was raised or the dark holds that life had on me. I was very sad at a point, very depressed growing up. And when I turned 19, I just had to make a change because nobody was going to save me. It's not like they were going to come back and help me. There was a point in my time where I did call out to my real dad, and I actually begged him for help, told him how frustrated life was and, frustrating things were for me. I was really on a bad trip, came 19, but him asking me if I really wanted to admit myself into a mental hospital or if I wanted to press on was, some of the questions he would ask that really would just psych me out of whatever mental space I was in and really push me forward. If that's the end all be all is the psych ward because I can't figure it out, then I don't think I necessarily need to be there. Maybe I just need to figure out what I'm doing and how I'm going to do it moving forward. And in the end, I found balance. I am still figuring things out. I'm not the best version of myself. I'm not the greatest guy you will ever meet. But I can say when you knew me, or if you knew me as LaJuan Curtis Clark II, and you look at who I am now as Jamil May, you're surprised. And if you aren't surprised, then you must have known that I was going to make these changes because it's drastic. It's a big difference from who I was at 19 and who I am at 25 compared to who I was at 15 to who I was at 10. A lot of things changed me. A lot of problems occurred where I was either kicked out or sent away or told no or looked down on or, just pushed out, neglected, and in a way that created a trauma that unfortunately doesn't leave you, but it is something that I can hold dear to and remind myself that I am still great no matter what I've been through. It's not what I've been through, but what I make out of where I am. And I actually am doing everything I can to embody creativity authentically. I know I was created in a concrete soil, and I'm somehow supposed to figure out how to still be a rose and blossom through it all. But in the midst, I know that I keep being dedicated and I keep working on whatever is important to me, which is those three things I named: basketball, architecture, and writing. And as I continue to progress forward, I just hope that you guys could take my story and just look at your own story and realize how much work you're actually putting in to being the best version of yourself. It's not easy, but the focus is being consistent, and the focus stays on your dedication. If you remain dedicated to changing things and evolving your lifestyle, it'll work out. Just keep pushing.